All right. The title of my sermon today is The Faithfulness of God. Hopefully you were paying attention during worship and paying attention to the words, so then I don't really have to preach because we are talking about the faithfulness of God. This morning we are continuing with our study of the book of Genesis. And once again, I just want to remind us quickly why it is we're spending all this time in Genesis. It's because it lays out the big story of the world. We're starting at the beginning of the world. Who God is, who we are, why we're here, the problem of humanity. You think there's a problem in humanity? Could be. And God's solution for the problem of humanity. In Genesis, we find our identity as human beings and why it is that instead of going off and each individually trying to figure this all out, we live in community. So I'm going to be speaking from Genesis chapter 9, verses 1 through 17. Before I start, I'm just going to do a quick review. I'm not going to go all the way back to Adam and Eve and their perfect Garden of Eden. But we are now in a place where the entire earth is peopled with evil humanity. Glenn in chapter 6 asked the question or made the statement, who we worship affects who we are. So if all of humanity had turned away from God, who were they worshiping? And how did that affect them? How did that make them who they were? In verse 9, it states that Noah was a righteous man. And in verse 11, it says, now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how evil and corrupt the earth had become, for all the people of the earth had corrupted their ways. And so he's going to wipe it out, and he's going to start all over. Now, we need to be reminded that it took a while for humanity to get this bad, because it feels like when you're reading Genesis chapter 1 through 9, it goes pretty quickly. This is not the case. At the beginning of the story of the flood, it says that Noah was 600 years old. But brains smarter than mine have estimated by going through the genealogy from Adam and Eve through Noah that it was around 1,650 years up to the flood. So I'm thinking mankind could degenerate pretty well left to their own devices in 1,650 years, and that's what's happened. In Genesis 7, Job shared that God gave instructions to build the ark to save his family, to save a remnant of the animals, that the waters flooded the earth. It says that every living thing that moved on land perished. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. Only Noah was left and those with him on the ark. The most important note here, God invited Noah into safety. Even though everyone else on the earth was evil, he saw Noah and he invited him into safety. And then last week, when Glenn taught from chapter 8, he pointed out that in the midst of the chaos and the unimaginable destruction, God remembering Noah is again the main point of the story. God saw that Noah was a righteous man. He invited him into safety and salvation from the flood by instructing him to build the ark. So, at the end of chapter 8, Noah and his family and the animals are exiting the ark into the new world. And Noah presents a pleasing sacrifice to God, and God promises, makes a covenant between himself and humanity that he will never do that again. So now we come to chapter 9. Now I'm going to read this 17 verses in two parts because the first half is all about God's instructions to Noah on how to enter into and live in this brand new world. And in the second half, God is again making his promise, his covenant with Noah and his family and his descendants and us. So this is the continuing story of Noah and the flood and how the world started all over. Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall on the beasts of the earth, and on all the birds of the sky, on every creature that moves along the ground, and on all the fish in the sea, and they are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves about you will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. But you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood in it. And for your lifeblood, I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal and from every human being too. I will demanding an accounting for the life of another human being. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made mankind. As for you, be fruitful and increase in number, multiply on the earth and increase upon it." So they went through the flood and they came out the other side to a completely different world. And God gives Noah the same kind of mandate that he originally gave to Adam and Eve in the beginning of creation, because Noah is essentially starting all over again with a new thing. So he was exhorted to be fruitful and multiply, but there were also some big changes. For one thing, God says that now every living thing is food for you. Adam had originally been given every plant, every fruit, except, of course, the tree of life. But now Noah is receiving permission to eat animals. Now, it's been speculated that the reason for this is because the flood, the rains, changed the ecology of the earth. That the earth was no longer going to be able to provide enough vegetable food, vegetation, and that somehow the atmosphere had changed in such a way that we now needed to eat animals and get nutrition. But this is speculation. The Bible doesn't actually tell us why he decided that we could eat animals. The other thing that's interesting is it says the fear of humanity and the dread of humanity would be on every beast of the earth. Animals were now going to be afraid of human beings, which leads us to believe that animals weren't afraid of human beings before. Now, why would God do that? Well, I think that probably for one reason he had to do that in order to protect the animals. Before the flood, mankind was making use of animals to work in the fields, to carry burdens, whatever, transportation, the ways you can think of using animals. Although I kind of wonder if mankind, being evil, might have also taken to killing animals for sport, for no good reason. But the point is, if humanity was going to be killing animals for food, the animals would need to fear people for their own protection. Otherwise, man could just go in and slaughter them all, and they'd all be standing there like, "What? Why are you doing this?" So God put the fear of humankind into the animals to protect them. But it's also a way to protect us, because animals need to fear and respect us if we're going to be able to train and use them from now on, especially if they're bigger than us and they're stronger than us. Elephants and camels and horses and oxen and all of that. So God was not only taking care of the animals by doing this, he was also taking care of the human beings. And then God talks to Noah and his family about not drinking blood. So if you follow a kosher diet, you know that when you kill the animal, you drain all the blood out before you process the meat. And that's because of this right here. God also talks again about it in Deuteronomy and in Leviticus. But we need to understand that the blood has deep significance. If we look back in history, there are times and cultures and peoples that placed all sorts of interesting significance on blood. I mean, there was the belief that if I killed you and I drank your blood, I then inherited all of your strength and power and your abilities. But throughout the Bible, from now on, we're going to see significance in the blood as representing life. When God gives his people mandates to make sacrifices at the altar, it's blood that's poured out on the altar. Blood is used as a sign of mercy for Israel and during the Passover in Egypt. Blood is used for cleansing and consecration. And of course, ultimately, when he sends his son Jesus to save us, it's Jesus' own blood that is poured out and shed for us for our forgiveness of sins, for our salvation. God then goes on to talk to Noah about how to deal with murder, because life is valuable to God. Now, I'm not going to address capital punishment right now, because it's above my pay grade. And so if you want to have an intelligent discussion about capital punishment, call Glenn. The point that I do want to make is that murder is not a small thing in God's eyes. Even the fact that God had to murder animals in order to make skins for Adam and Eve way back in the beginning of Genesis, I don't think that was a small thing for him, let alone people murdering people. Later on in Numbers, in chapter 35, we learned that it says that the guilt of unpunished murder actually defiles the whole land. And then his final instruction is to remind Noah of his responsibility to be fruitful and multiply. The point being, obviously, that the earth needed repopulating. Now, none of these instructions were arbitrary. They were all examples of God taking care of his children, providing his children with protection, providing for their needs. If I was going to make one point for this first half of the chapter, I think it would be in the form of a question. How much do you believe that God, the maker of the universe, our Heavenly Father, can be trusted to care for you in all circumstances, no matter what? Scary circumstances, painful circumstances, bizarre circumstances, circumstances that aren't your fault, completely. And what do your actions and your decisions and the way you make those decisions say about your answer to that question? Oops. Do we trust that God's ways are the best ways and the only ways for us? I mean, I don't know. I'm thinking that this whole situation with Noah was a little anxiety producing. I mean, he's building an ark in the midst of an evil, unbelieving, violent world around him. Everyone is against him. You know, there was a time in American and European history when prisons did not have individual cells. They would just throw all the men, because it was men that were in the prisons, throw all the men into a giant room, a dormitory, if you will, that had shelves in the walls that you could sort of sleep on if you managed to grab one. Okay, so think about it. You got everybody from age 8 to age whatever. You've got murderers and rapists and psychopaths and kids who sold bread because they were starving. All of those people are thrown into a room and they're on their own. The prison guards don't come in and deal with them. They are on their own. They are supposed to police themselves. Can you imagine living in that environment? Especially, heaven forbid, you were an innocent person. I mean, people are wrongfully convicted. If you're a child or you're an innocent person, you are surrounded by this evil, and there is no place safe, and there is no hope. And I'm envisioning Noah and his family in this situation. So he has to build the ark. And I'm assuming it's just Noah and his sons, because certainly nobody else is going to help him. And then they have to go about getting all the provisions together. And then they have to round up all the animals and get them on the ark. Do you think that the responsibility of all of this might have been just a little overwhelming? And then when it starts raining, when it really starts happening, and he's loading his family in, and he's shutting and locking those doors and locking out the world and everything that they have known, and the water starts rising, do you think at some point there were probably people knocking on the side of the boat, begging to be let in? Do you think maybe he was tempted to disobey God? And do you think when the rain went on and on and on, and then even after it stopped, it was still just water everywhere? Do you think that maybe there was a moment of doubt as to whether or not they were going to survive? So it floods and it floods and it floods and it stops, and then they still have to wait before they disembark, and then they finally step out into desolation. Now, I was Googling Noah and the ark, and I was looking at images. And one of the pictures that struck me was this gorgeous, pristine wilderness with a mountain in the background and a waterfall and big, beautiful trees and grasses and a stream, and there's Noah and his little family and a couple animals. Every living thing got destroyed. So when the waters finally receded enough, there's probably some vegetation that started to come up, because after all, he sent a dove and he came back with a little olive leaf. But it wasn't from this big, gorgeous 10-year-old olive tree. It was probably from a little bush that was beginning to recover after being covered with water for months and months and months. So that's what they stepped out into. No people anywhere, no animals except for the ones that came off the ark with them. If ever there was a time to trust God, I suppose this was it. Total desolation. Fortunately, God knew exactly what they needed, and he began immediately providing for Noah. So again, do we believe that God can be trusted to care for us, that his ways are the best and the only ways? Then on to verses 8 through 17. Then God said to Noah and to his sons, I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. Everything, everyone. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is a sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. That's us. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures and everything on the earth. So God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life on earth." So God made a covenant, a promise to never do this again. Do you think that God maybe thought that mankind was going to get it right this time? Back in chapter 8, it says, "Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood." He promises. He promises he's not going to destroy us for our sinfulness. Noah, who was a follower of God, who had a righteous desire to please God, came out of the ark and immediately presented a sacrifice to God. And yes, God was pleased. And yes, he knew that Noah was a righteous man. But God also knew that Noah was not perfect and that Noah would sin. And his family would sin. And his descendants would sin. And we would sin. And yet he promised to never flood and destroy humanity again. So the question is, do you trust that God is faithful to his word, to his promises? This word, the word in the Bible, the words that he may have spoken to you personally, he is not going to forsake you because you've messed up. He is not going to write you off and start over with someone else. He promises. We all blow it. We all sin. We all at times have chosen our own selfish desires over God's will. But he promises to not abandon us. There are times when you've blown it and you feel like God is far away. That's not because he moved. What caused Noah to be seen as a righteous man? His heart towards God, his desire to be in right relationship with God, but it doesn't happen overnight. All those life decisions, big and small, whether we turn towards God and obey or turn away. Every day, baby steps. That is what's formed in him to make him a righteous man. And obviously, decision to keep following God ended up, in this case, as a matter of life and death. As Glenn said, who we worship affects who we are. And this is just a suggestion, but the time to develop the habit, if you were, of trusting God and trusting in his faithfulness and turning toward him, toward him, toward him, the time to dedicate yourself to seeking his will is before the disaster strikes, before everything hits the fan. Grab onto this. He promises that he won't abandon us. And you know why I know this? Not just the rainbow, not just the covenant, this promise, but because he has loved us so much that he provided a way for us out of the chaos and the violence and the sin and the corruption of our own lives and the world we live in today, but not through an ark, through Jesus. His blood washes away our sin. The Bible speaks to his faithfulness over and over and over. I want to ask the worship and prayer teams to come up as I land this. Some of this is probably not news to you. Many of you have been Christians for a long time, in which case this is maybe just a reminder. But maybe today is the day that you need to sort of review your habit of trusting or not trusting God. Do we believe that God, our Heavenly Father, can be trusted to care for us in all situations? That His ways are the best ways and the only ways for us? That we can trust Him to keep His word? That He is faithful? In spite of what the world is telling us, or our friends, or our family, or our professions, or our fears are telling us. And for anyone who's not quite there, that's not quite sure about all of this, maybe not quite sure about Jesus, I'll tell you one thing that's true. The Creator of the universe has promised that He would never destroy mankind again and wipe them off the face of the earth. And even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood, He is not going to give up on you. Baby steps. It's just baby steps. Just as Noah was a righteous man to God because of all the decisions that he made throughout the years, big and small, to remain a follower of God, we make decisions big and small every day to move closer in our relationship with God and in righteousness, or to move further away. Am I going to trust God? Am I going to trust that His ways are the only ways? Am I going to trust in His promises and in His faithfulness? If this is something that you want prayer for today, I invite you to come up to pray with our prayer team, or to turn to someone that you're with that you trust. It's important. We're going to sing a song that's an old hymn. Listen to the words. Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. All thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever will be.